Hey, Mike here. I just wanted to let you know that you can listen to Dark Poutine early and ad-free on Amazon Music, included with Prime. Welcome back to Dark Poutine. I'm Mike Brown. Across the table from me is Matthew Stockton. Hello, Matthew.
Hello, everybody.
We came back from our little meetup in Seattle where we saw a bunch of people.
That was great.
Yeah, it was really fun.
Yeah.
And we had really good mochi nut donuts. Oh my God. It was nice to be able to put donut money to use to buy donuts for everybody.
Yeah, it was a good meetup.
Yeah, it was really good. I had fun.
The views, information, and opinions expressed during the Dark Poutine podcast are solely those of the producer and do not necessarily represent those of Curious Cast, its affiliate, Global News, nor their parent company, Chorus Entertainment.
Dark Poutine is not for the faint of heart or squeamish. Our content is often intense and some listeners may find it disturbing. We are not experts on the topics we present, nor are we journalists. We are ordinary Canadian schmucks chatting about crime and the dark side of history. Let's get to it.
Put on your toque, grab yourself a double-double and a Nanaimo bar. It's time to scarf down some Dark Poutine.
Fresh.
Are you calling me fresh?
You're fresh.
I am. As we learned in the first part of this two-part story, in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, on the morning of January 31st, 1969, a 12-year-old girl on the way to school stumbled upon the body of Gail Miller, a 20-year-old nurse's aide. She was laying in the snow in an alleyway. Gail had been raped, murdered, and discarded by her killer in the snow. As there'd been a number of sexual assaults in the city, police were under enormous pressure to solve the murder, and soon their attention turned to 16-year-old David Edgar Milgaard. He'd been in the neighborhood at a home nearby the alley where Gail's body lay on the morning of the murder. Witnesses later claimed that he'd been seen with blood on his clothing, and they gave other incriminating information to the police. Milgaard was subsequently arrested and charged with Gail's murder. In this episode, we'll hear how, exactly a year after the murder, David Milgaard was convicted of the murder and sentenced to a term of life in prison. Justice, it appeared, had been served. We'll find out that that was not the case at all. After serving 23 hellish years in prison, David Milgaard, who'd always maintained his innocence, was finally exonerated by DNA evidence that pointed to another man as Gail Miller's killer. You are listening to Dark Poutine episode 225, Tragedy Times 2, Gail Miller and David Milgaard, Part 2. The day before David Milgaard's jury trial was to start, witness Ron Wilson dropped what the Crown determined to be a bombshell. Wilson was claiming that mutual friends of he and David Milgaard's, Craig Melnick and George Lapchuk, had told Wilson about a supposed confession made by Milgaard while they were partying in a Regina motel room after the murder. Everyone in the room was under the influence of drugs at the time, including Milgaard. Melnick said that the story of Gail Miller's killing came on television around 11 p.m. and Lapchuk teased David Milgaard about it. Milgaard apparently made light of Lapchuk's ribbing, knelt on the bed with a pillow between his legs, made stabbing motions, and said, "I stabbed her. I killed her 14 times. Fucking bitch." Then rolled over on his side and laughed. Melnick said he was surprised by Milgaard's reaction. Melnick didn't know whether or not Milgaard was kidding, but also claimed that David looked serious about it. There was a silence in the room for some time afterward, and that was the last anyone said of it.
Did everyone in that room corroborate what was said?
No, And we'll get into that later. The police didn't interview everybody who was in the room.
Ooh, interesting.
Yeah. David's defense attorney, Calvin Tallis, tried to keep the reenactment out of the trial as it would be prejudicial against Milgaard, but it was ultimately allowed. David's defense team only had a short amount of time to interview these surprise witnesses. The Crown prosecution began dramatically laying out its evidence in the case, including crime scene photos and an autopsy report. Sergeant Bruce Painter of the RCMP lab gave testimony that the semen found at the scene was of human origin and contained A antigens, so that it came from a person who had the blood type A. That person had secreted antigens into his bodily fluids. He could not rule out the possibility that it also might have come from an AB secretor. Milgaard's blood type was determined to be type A. However, a test of Milgaard's saliva did not disclose A antigens, leading to the belief that he was a non-secretor. Calvin Tallis argued that as Milgaard appeared to be a non-secretor, it was impossible that the semen was his. As roughly 36% of people in Canada are blood type A, it was not the strongest piece of evidence anyway, just a part of what the Crown hoped would paint the larger picture, leading the jury toward the presumption of guilt for David Milgaard.
So there's no DNA back then.
No.
And so they're relying on one of the most popular blood types.
Mm-hmm.
And they've kind of essentially proven that the semen wasn't his.
They found out that he wasn't a secretor later on.
I can't say that word secretor without laughing.
I know. Ron Wilson helped the prosecution a lot. His earlier claims that he and Milgaard had only been apart for a few moments to 2 minutes after the car became stuck had now expanded to 15 minutes, and that Ron had walked a number of blocks away from the car looking for a service station. Ron also now said that he'd seen a blood spot on David Milgaard's pants no bigger than 1.5 to 2 inches in diameter.
So this witness seems a little bit unreliable. Was there a strong cross-examination of why he was changing his story over time and adding these details?
Yes.
Okay.
But,
Didn't go far.
no. I mean, yeah. From the Star Phoenix newspaper, quote, Wilson said that after looking for a service station, he returned to the car and found Miss John in the car by herself, screaming hysterically. He said that when Milgaard returned to the car, he had blood on the front of his clothing, end quote. Wilson also spoke about having found the cosmetics bag in the glove box and how David Milgaard had tossed it out of the moving car when he'd asked if anyone knew to whom it belonged. Wilson also testified that Milgaard had mentioned hitting a woman with a knife while stealing her purse on the morning of Gail Miller's murder, and that Milgaard had claimed to have, quote, fixed her, but she should be okay. Albert Cadrain's reliability as a witness was questionable. He did not present as the sharpest tool in the shed, but he was the one who'd first alerted police to Milgaard as a potential suspect. So he was important to the Crown's case. Albert testified about seeing blood on Milgaard's pants and shirt tail on the morning of the murder, while Milgaard and Wilson were changing in his home.
Isn't this the guy that got the $2,000 reward after suddenly remembering all these things?
Yes, it is. From the trial transcript, Cadrain. Well, first he had a brown coat, and it was all chewed up by acid, and he had a rip in the crotch of his pants, and there was blood on his clothes. Caldwell, the prosecutor. Who was this? Cadrain. David. Caldwell. And where was that? Cadrain. On his shirt and on his pants. Caldwell. And in what area of the clothes? Cadrain. Well, just below the belt and a little above the stomach area. A little above.
So where are these supposedly bloody clothes? Have they been entered into evidence?
Well, no, they couldn't enter them into evidence because they weren't there.
So it's all hearsay.
Yeah.
Okay.
But so what's interesting about the bloody clothes and other people testifying about them is you have David Milgaard saying, I can't remember where I put them. And then, so that would lead the police to think that he's lying. But maybe he legitimately couldn't remember where he'd put them because they weren't important to him.
And they were destroyed from that battery acid as well.
Right, exactly.
Right.
But, and maybe these, quote, blood spots that people saw were battery acid on the clothes.
Or if he was like me, I always have ketchup stains down the front of my shirt.
Sure. But at the same time, it's like, this is where it gets problematic. Police think, well, he must be lying if he doesn't remember where they are, or if he's telling us he doesn't remember where they are. But maybe he legitimately doesn't remember.
There's a lot of bleeps that are piling up.
Yeah, exactly. Nicole John testified too. She recalled Milgaard having thrown the cosmetics bag out the window, but she stopped short of saying she'd seen blood on David's trousers. Nicole also said that she'd seen 2 knives in Wilson's car.
So a second witness didn't confirm that there was blood on the clothes.
Yep.
After he'd gone away for maybe 2 and maybe 15 minutes.
Right. And maybe did some other things and all of this stuff. From the Star Phoenix, quote, while en route to Saskatoon, she said she saw 2 knives in the car, one a maroon-handled paring knife and the other a hunting knife with a bone handle, which Milgaard was holding. She was unable to recall where in the car she had seen the paring knife. She also said she had seen each knife only on one occasion, end quote. She did not repeat that she had witnessed David Milgaard stab Gail Miller, as she had claimed in her May 24, 1969 statement to Saskatoon police. This was kind of important. Interestingly, the judge then allowed the Crown to read Nicole's statement from that day, in which she claimed to have seen the murder. Nicole said that at the time she took drugs, including LSD, hash, and THC, perhaps twice a week, and she has sometimes had hallucinations. They'd all been doing a lot of drugs at the time, she claimed. Crown Prosecutor Caldwell then asked Nicole if what she'd said on May 24th was true, to which Nicole said, "I don't know." At this point, Justice Bentz chimed in. According to the trial transcript, he said, quote, in respect to the statement that this witness admits giving, the only evidence that can be considered against the accused are the portions of the statement which the witness has accepted under oath in the witness box. Any statement that she has not admitted to being the truth is not evidence against the accused, end quote. The jury, Bentz said, was only to look at the statement as the Crown's attempt to prove or disprove the credibility of the witness, and not as actual evidence. The damage had been done, though. The jury had heard loudly and clearly Caldwell reading Nicole's earlier statements in which she claimed to have seen David dragging a woman into the alleyway and stabbing her.
You know, I always laugh when I'm watching a court drama and the judge says, the jury will ignore that.
Yeah.
Like, how are they going to ignore it? So in this case, you have one person saying they're bloody clothes, one not saying, but there's no bloody clothes as evidence.
And also now she's not saying, she hadn't said that she saw him do anything.
And then there's like, maybe there's this, maybe there's that.
But then the lawyer, the Crown, reads into evidence in front of the jury what she had supposedly said to the police.
And then she's saying, don't really know.
Right, but they're saying, please ignore this information.
That was just read out.
That was just read out to you, where Nicole John said to police earlier on, I saw David Milgaard murder this woman, drag her into the alley and murder this woman. This is the very important point.
Right.
And then the judge says, well,
just ignore that.
Just ignore that. You can't unring a bell, to coin a phrase.
Absolutely not.
Another blow to Milgaard's defense was when Craig Melnick and George Lapchuk testified about Milgaard's supposed confession in the Regina motel room. As with many defendants, which is their right, David Milgaard was not called to testify in his own defense. On January 31st, 1970, exactly a year after Gail Miller's murder, the front page of the Star Phoenix newspaper carried the headline, Jury finds Milgaard guilty. The brief story read, David Edgar Milgaard, 17, of Regina, was found guilty of non-capital murder in Queen's Bench Court today and sentenced to life imprisonment by Mr. Justice A.H. Bentz. Milgaard, dressed in a green suit with a gold shirt and tie, half smiled when the verdict was given. He smiled at the jury members when they entered the courtroom. The jury, 1 woman and 11 men, deliberated for just over 11 hours, excluding the time taken for meals and sleeping. They went out at 12:17 p.m. Friday and were kept under guard overnight at a nearby hotel. At 1 a.m., they retired for the night, returning at 10 a.m. About 30 spectators were on hand to see the finish of the 9-day trial, which attracted hundreds of people. After the sentence was given, many teenage girls in the court started to cry. They were the same girls who the night before had waited for a verdict and told reporters, quote, "There is no other excitement in the city." During the trial, the Crown called 45 witnesses, and the defense did not call any witnesses. T.D.R. Caldwell was the prosecutor, and defense counsel was Cal Tallis, assisted by Ian Disbury. The parents of Milgaard, who attended the trial each day, appeared stunned by the verdict. Mrs. Milgaard, her face ashen, stared into the courtroom, and her husband placed his hand on her arm as the verdict was read. End quote. As appeals of the decision began, it became apparent that there had been a number of missteps in the prosecution of David Milgaard. Another woman had reported an incident on the morning of January 31st, 1969 at 7:07 a.m., approximately 8 blocks from where Gail Miller's body was found. A police officer had written "unrelated assault" on the top of his statement. As a result, the Crown prosecutor Caldwell did not consider it relevant to the prosecution of David Milgaard, and he did not provide a copy to David's defense attorney, Calvin Tallis. Current practice is that the statement should be provided, and it would be up to the defense counsel to decide its relevance. However, in those days, police exercised discretion in their choice of material sent to the prosecutor, and the prosecutor, in turn, used his discretion in deciding what would be helpful for the defense. At the time of this event, David Milgaard was believed to have been on his way to the Travelier Motel, so the timeline didn't fit.
Discretion, that's an interesting word.
Right.
It seems like they didn't want to share this as evidence because it went against their case.
Right.
And facts are facts. Just because it's inconvenient doesn't mean you leave it out.
Mm-hmm.
If you're really searching for justice. Right?
But here, this is the thing. This is why it's more ensured now that this kind of thing is shared with the defense. Mm. It's like all the evidence gathered is shared with the defense now, whereas before police were like, well, it's not really connected to the case. So maybe they legitimately believed that it was not connected to the case and just, overlooked it.
I'm glad they fixed that because police aren't lawyers.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
You're correct.
There was also the glaring question of the other sexual assaults and attempted assaults that police at first had presumed might be connected to Gail Miller's murder. Milgaard had been provably not in Saskatoon at the time of those assaults, so if he were truly guilty of Gail Miller's slaying, they could not possibly be connected. To refresh from the last episode, victim 1 of the sexual assault group was raped on October 22, 1968. Relevant documents were read in prior to her later testimony. The attacker had used a knife in the attack. In them, she described her attacker as 5'2" to 5'4" inches tall, around 18 years old, with dark hair hanging over his face. David Milgaard, taller, slimmer, and younger, did not match this description. Victim 2 described the attacker who raped her on November 13, 1968, as a man of 18 to 25 years old, 5'5", with dark hair which hung over his forehead, wearing a white hard hat and smelling of oil and gas. He'd used a knife. Victim 3 was attacked on November 29, 1968. According to her statement, it was by a man with a knife about 20 years old, 5'6" inches tall, with long, dark hair. He was frightened off by an approaching vehicle before he could complete the rape. The victim from the attack that occurred on January 31, 1969, she said the time was exactly 7:07 a.m. because she'd looked at her wristwatch, but always kept it a few minutes fast. She described her attacker as 5'5" or 5'6" inches tall, wearing a 3/4 length dark suede or leather jacket with a fur collar. He wore only one glove on his left hand. He had a darker complexion, possibly Métis. Also, none of this matching David Milgaard. Less than a month after David's conviction, there was yet another sexual assault. With Milgaard in prison, it definitely could not have been him. At approximately 8:25 p.m. on the evening of Saturday, February 21, 1970, another victim was sexually assaulted. The attacker followed the woman home on the bus and attacked her in the vicinity of Avenue V at 20th Street in Saskatoon. He grabbed her from behind, put his hand over her mouth, tore her coat off, and hit her 4 or 5 times. The woman tried to kick him and pull her attacker's hair, and she bit his finger. The woman had told police that she thought she would recognize her assailant if she saw him again. Once again, the victim's description of her attacker closely fit that of a man described in the other 4 instances. After that last assault in February, the assault stopped in Saskatoon. But months later, 2 more sexual assaults with a very similar MO took place in Fort Garry, a community in Winnipeg, Manitoba. On August 2nd, 1970, a woman had finished work at a hospital late at night and was on her way home. A man grabbed her from behind and dragged her into the bush. He told her not to scream, bit her on both breasts, and sexually assaulted her. He struck her several times in the face. She tried to fight him off, biting him on the hand and pulling his hair, but he choked her with his arm. The attacker told her to turn over onto her stomach, and then he tied her hands and ankles using her stockings and bra. Before leaving, he took the money from her wallet. Late in the evening of September 19, 1970, a man armed with a knife sexually assaulted a woman in Fort Garry, using her coat to cover her face. People nearby heard the woman's screams and called for police, who rushed to the scene, capturing the rapist in the act. The man confessed to the sexual assault during which he'd been caught, and also to the sexual assault that had taken place on August 2nd. The man admitted he'd just moved from Saskatoon for work in Winnipeg. He was a man with a darker complexion, of shorter stature, with long dark hair that hung down over his forehead. He was identified as none other than Larry Earl Fisher, the same Larry Earl Fisher who'd used the same bus stop as Gail Miller and had been questioned there after her murder. The same Larry Earl Fisher who lived in the basement of the Cadrain residence with his wife and daughter. The same home at which David Milgaard and Ron Wilson had changed clothes before heading out with Albert Cadrain on the morning of Gail Miller's murder.
They had him, and they let him go.
Yeah, like a day after the murder.
That's crazy.
Mm-hmm.
He was there all along.
Yeah.
Winnipeg police reached out to the Saskatoon cops, who said they had no awareness of Fisher other than a brief conversation with him on the morning of Gail Miller's murder. He'd not been suspected of that murder at all, nor was he questioned at this time about it. The police in both jurisdictions compared notes, and Fisher fit the description of the alleged attacker in the unsolved assaults in Saskatoon. Cops showed his photo to the victims in Saskatoon, but only one, the 4th victim, was able to positively ID him as the man who'd attacked her in the February of that year. Fisher first denied the sexual assaults believed to be connected in Saskatoon. In late October, he owned up to the last sexual assault and the attempted sexual assault in Saskatoon. However, he maintained his innocence regarding the first 2 victims, which both occurred before Gail Miller was killed. On November 6, 1970, David Milgaard's appeal was heard by the Saskatchewan Court of Appeal. It cited issues around Nicole John's testimony, especially that the Crown was able to read her earlier very accusatory statement to the jury. On December 30th, 1970, Larry Fisher was charged with the rapes of Saskatoon sexual assault victims 1, 2, and 4, and the indecent assault of the 3rd woman in Saskatoon. On January 5th, 1971, David Milgaard's appeal was dismissed by the Saskatchewan Court of Appeal. A portion of that decision reads, quote, "The learned trial judge carefully instructed the jury that the statement, which was the subject matter of the cross-examination, was not evidence. He further instructed the jury that the only evidence of Nicole John was that which she gave in the witness box. Such a direction was a proper one. It is to be noted that no objection has been taken by the appellant to the manner in which the learned trial judge instructed the jury in this respect." End quote. The justice's decision continued, quote, "I have reviewed the evidence in detail. I am satisfied the learned trial judge adequately instructed the jury as to the applicable principles of law. In his review of the facts, he was extremely careful and presented them to the jury in a manner that was very fair to the appellant. In my opinion, the jury, in finding the appellant guilty, applied the proper principles of law to the evidence before them, and on such evidence could properly find the appellant guilty as charged. There are, in my view, no grounds upon which this court would be justified in interfering with the jury's decision." End quote.
But wait, the appeal wasn't because the jurors were given wrong instructions.
Mm-hmm.
The appeal was that there was evidence that had been found, evidence that essentially saying there could have been a different killer,
Right.
right? Somebody who's out there doing stuff like this. So in my mind, Milgaard should have gotten a new trial then and there.
Yeah, but I think what they were looking at was that too, that the judge had said, ignore that evidence, and he had properly instructed the jury to ignore the evidence of Nicole John saying, not in the court, but to a police officer earlier, that she'd seen David Milgaard murdering Gail Miller.
Yeah, and they also have this other guy now, right? And that's the point.
Yeah, it's interesting that that's developing.
Yeah.
The appeals court believed that David Milgaard had gotten a fair trial. Milgaard's attorneys then aimed to take their case to the Canadian Supreme Court. On May 28, 1971, Larry Fisher pleaded guilty in Winnipeg to charges of 2 counts of rape, robbery, and possession of an offensive weapon regarding the sexual assaults on the 2 women in Fort Garry. He was sentenced to 13 years in prison for that. On November 15, 1971, the Supreme Court of Canada denied David Milgaard's application for leave to appeal, stating that it agreed with the lower court's decision. David was going to stay right where he was.
So it went all the way to the Supreme. What's the nickname of the Supreme Court? The Court of Last Resort.
Yes.
And they rejected
Mhm.
it, right? So when you hit your last resort and it's rejected, it's that's a tough blow.
Mm-hmm.
But I kind of don't understand how they could have. Let's talk about the Supreme Court a bit at the end of the show,
Sure.
because as we all know, Supreme Courts are somewhat in the news right now
Around the world.
with what's been going on.
On December 21st, 1971, Larry Earl Fisher pleaded guilty in Regina Court of Queen's Bench to 3 charges of rape and 1 charge of indecent assault relating to his 1968 and 1970 attacks on women in Saskatoon. Fisher was given 4 years on each of the 3 sexual assaults and 6 months for the indecent assault, all sentences to be concurrent with the existing sentence from Manitoba. In the result, no additional time was ordered. There are no news articles about these admissions and convictions, and it isn't clear whether any media were in attendance at all for the proceedings. Milgaard, his family, and his lawyers were all well aware of Larry Earl Fisher, especially his too-close-for-comfort living arrangements at the time of the murder, in the basement of the Cadrain home. Especially concerning to the Milgaard family is that the proceedings for Fisher's Saskatoon rape pleas conviction and sentencing were held in Regina and not in Saskatoon, where the offenses had been committed, which is the typical practice. According to the later inquiry into Milgaard's conviction, quote, "This arrangement caused the Milgaards in later years to suspect Saskatchewan of seizing the opportunity to dispose of Fisher's charges there quietly, so as not to draw attention to the similarity between his offenses and the Gail Miller murder." End quote. The Milgaards began to allege there was a conspiracy to cover up Fisher's possible involvement in Gail Miller's murder. Having convicted the wrong man in such a high-profile case would make a lot of powerful people look very, very bad. And we will be back after this short break. And we are back. Matthew, what are your thoughts on this episode so far?
The death penalty was still legal back then, wasn't
Yes,
it?
it was, until 1976.
Right. So he could have gotten the death penalty.
He could have, yep.
Right. So in cases like this, where they're total travesties of justice,
Yeah.
right, underscores to me why I don't support it.
Mm-hmm.
And we've seen time and time again, right? It's always a combination of things. Like there's either police mishandling or misconduct, or new evidence shows up that isn't covered, right?
Mm-hmm.
If there's been a cover up, right? There's a cover up, or sometimes there's a refusal to align with the reality that's coming to light.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have political pressure and all of this stuff, right? This is why I don't believe in the death penalty.
Right.
Because even if we just did, killed one person that wasn't guilty, that's too many. Right?
100%.
David Milgaard's conviction was not only devastating to him, obviously, but to his family as well. His mother, Joyce, the strongest advocate and staunch believer in his innocence, later wrote a book about the experience, co-authored by crime writer Peter Edwards. It was titled A Mother's Story, My Battle to Free David Milgaard. At the time, the Milgaards were living in the tiny town of Langenburg, Saskatchewan, in the rural municipality of Langenburg No. 181, less than 20 kilometers from the Manitoba-Saskatchewan border. Langenburg was where David's dad, Lorne, worked as a foreman in the local potash mine. The tiny town was divided by David Milgaard's conviction, with many believing strongly in David's guilt. David's siblings were taunted by other kids at school, calling David a killer, and David's teenage brother had to physically defend himself more than once.
I wonder if these people rightfully hung their heads in shame after he's eventually exonerated.
Maybe some, but I doubt anybody came back and said, I'm really sorry that I did that, because most people don't ever go and face up to what they've done wrong, even though what they're doing is punishing somebody for what they feel their family member did wrong.
Which is stupid in the first place.
It's all hypocritical.
Yeah.
Joyce vowed that she would fight to her dying breath to prove her son's innocence. She admitted her son was troubled, but he was no murderer. Some folks thought she was simply a mother blinded by her love for her son, unwilling to admit that he was capable of such a heinous act as the murder of Gail Miller. But Joyce knew better, and was determined to have her son exonerated. She prayed to the God in whom she had the utmost faith that one day, once the truth was revealed, her David would go free and Gail Miller's true killer would be brought to justice.
Imagine how hard that would be.
Mm-hmm.
You know, most of the world's thinking, oh, the poor mother just can't accept that her son's a killer, while she has in her heart the truth.
Yeah.
It would have been so hard for her.
Yeah, I've seen it a bunch of times. There's a movie, a documentary about a young man named Ryan Ferguson, and the documentary is called Dream Killer. And Ryan Ferguson was 17 years old when a murder was committed. And 2 years later, a friend of his calls up and says, me and Ryan Ferguson did it while we were drunk and high. And through all of this, Ryan ends up being convicted of this murder. And through all of it, his father was his most staunch supporter. Reminded me a lot of Joyce Milgaard.
Right.
And how she went for it. And eventually, Ryan Ferguson was exonerated for that crime. Interestingly, the other guy is still in jail for it, so it kind of doesn't make a lot of sense to me. But anyway, that's a long, weird, twisted tale. So watch Dream Killer. It's really good.
Okay.
David Milgaard, prisoner number 289699, understandably had a horrible time in jail. From forensic psychologist Dr. Patrick Bailey in the book Shrunk, Crime and Disorders of the Mind, quote, a report from the classification interview in March 1970 described David as, quote, a quiet, soft-spoken individual who impresses as being a person who is extremely depressed but hides the depression behind a smile. He repeatedly insists on his innocence and is convinced that the appeal court will verify that this is so. The report also mentioned, quote, several older cons who are protecting him and helping him find his way around, end quote. Despite the protection he'd had from the older cons early on, when David was moved to Dorchester Penitentiary in New Brunswick in 1972, things took a serious turn for the worse. Even though the majority of the lifers in Stony Mountain believed in David's innocence, the environment in Dorchester was not as welcoming. There were a violent few who did not like what they called skinners, a prison term for rapists and pedophiles. David was seen by some to fit that category. Milgaard, a slender 19-year-old by this time, quickly became a target for larger, tougher prisoners with chips on their shoulders, and David was raped repeatedly and his teeth smashed during vicious beatings. He begged to be put in solitary confinement so he could feel safe from the torture of the seeming constant barrage of threats and actual violence. Interestingly, one of the prisoners who was kind to him was Donald Marshall Jr., the Mi'kmaq man who was later exonerated and released after 11 years for a murder of which he was innocent. We covered Marshall's case in episode 90 of Dark Poutine.
My husband always gets really upset when we're watching true crime programs on TV
Mm-hmm.
and the police or anyone else make a statement to people that have been arrested about how, quote things like, "Oh, you're going to be popular in jail."
Yeah.
Just because they're in jail, it doesn't mean they should be subjected to sexual violence.
Yeah.
And it seems to me as a society,
Yeah.
in general, we don't really care about rape culture in prisons.
Yeah.
I wonder if there are any lawyers or prison staff out there listening. Call us, let us know. Do people ever bring charges against other inmates for rape? I'd assume they'd probably be too afraid to do it. And if so, are charges taken seriously in the system?
Well, I've read an article in one of the newspapers in Alberta, and it said in 2018, prisoners made 67 allegations of sexual assault in the 5 years prior, so between 2013 and 2018.
Right.
So only 67. And only one of those resulted in a criminal charge. So only one. And it's really interesting because in prison they have this anti-snitch culture as well. So you don't, even if you are
A victim.
a victim and really set upon by these other folks, to go ahead and tattle. It's so elementary school.
In some ways, yeah.
Yeah, like these weird sort of things that
Go on.
yeah, that go on. It's very weirdly immature. I don't know what what I'm expecting for a bunch of
Yeah. But also some, not everyone in jail is like some violent criminal, right?
Mm-hmm. No,
And
a lot aren't.
And lo and behold, with this story, some are bloody innocent.
Right.
So
Yeah.
Only months after being transferred to Dorchester, David was told he was to be transferred westward again, this time to the notoriously hard Stony Mountain Penitentiary, just north of Winnipeg, a 20-minute drive from his folks. A year passed, and the transfer did not materialize. David was feeling more and more hopeless. The Crown prosecutor from David's trial, Mr. Caldwell, wrote the Parole Board of Canada that, in his opinion, David Milgaard should never be released, as he was dangerous and would likely reoffend. A psychiatrist at Saskatoon's University Hospital had labeled David a sociopathic personality, most likely in part as he would not admit to nor take any responsibility for the crime for which he'd been convicted.
wow, that's a catch-22 from Hades.
Yeah.
If you're innocent and refuse to say that you're guilty, you're labeled a dangerous sociopath.
Yep.
If you're innocent and say you're guilty to try to maybe get parole, you're labeled a murderer for the rest of your life.
That's right.
Like, it's just a horrible, horrible place to be.
Right. Like,
You can't win. You
Yeah.
absolutely cannot win. If you've been found guilty wrongly, it is so hard to be not guilty.
yeah.
According to Dr. Patrick Bailey in Shrunk, over his years of incarceration, quote, David was given a range of mental health diagnoses, including schizoid personality disorder, psychopathic personality type, sociopathic personality disorder, character disorder with strong antisocial features, situational psychotic illness, schizophrenia, acute reaction in a psychopathic personality, prison psychosis, acute schizophrenic episode, manic depressive phase, illness, disease, or disorder, substance abuse, acute psychotic reaction, personality disorder, other and unspecified, schizophreniform psychosis, and major affective disorder, end quote. However, inconsistently, some psychological evaluations of David concluded there was no evidence at all of any major mental illness. Despondent, David made the first of several attempts to die by suicide.
I found that really painful.
Yeah, me too. But it's understandable.
Yeah, I mean, I probably would too.
The guy's been through all these different courts of appeal. He knows he didn't do anything.
All these judgments, all the hatred, all the vile, all the vitriol that he'd get, all this horrible stuff happening to him.
Yeah.
In 1973, David saw his options were very limited. He became aware that some other inmates were planning an escape and was determined to tag along. The other prisoners did not want him involved, but David Milgaard was undeterred. From Joyce Milgaard's book, A Mother's Story, quote, David felt so alone and so far from home that he wasn't going to pass up an opportunity, even if the prisoners planning a breakout were a rough group. David had just failed in another suicide attempt, and he wanted out of Dorchester dead or alive. The prisoners plotting the escape could see that David wasn't about to be scared off, so they let him join in. They left dummies in their beds to mislead guards and then overpowered and tied up a guard and scaled a stone wall to freedom. They hid out in a farmhouse of an elderly couple who recognized them from a news bulletin. They tied up the couple and didn't hurt them, but then they fled in the couple's old pickup truck, end quote. The truck broke down and Milgaard and the other escapees were arrested after having been tracked by dogs. Milgaard later said that the guards had allowed the dogs to, quote, chew on them for a while after they'd been caught. Back at the prison, David claimed he'd been beaten by the guards even more brutally than he had been by any inmate up to that point. When asked why he tried to escape, David later told his mother, quote, I did not want to die in prison. I felt like I was dying a little bit there every day, end quote. Finally, in 1974, David's transfer came through. He was on his way back to Stony Mountain and closer to home. David was learning to play the game in prison. According to the paper Maintaining Innocence, the prison experiences of the wrongfully convicted by Esti Aziz at the University of Ottawa, quote, in his first 18 months, prison officials recorded 31 institutional offenses, including refusing orders and threatening guards. This behavior likely gained Milgaard's status within the prison hierarchy as he learned to mind his own business and to keep to himself while rejecting the authority of the prison administration. He focused on his post-secondary education and had a desire to, quote, avoid problems, end quote.
Do you remember when you were 16?
Oh, God, yes, I definitely do.
So, and anyone out there was, 16-year-old kids, a little bit of rebellion. He's essentially growing up like we all did, making mistakes like we all did.
But he has to do them in prison, yeah.
But doing it within the prison system.
Yeah. Yeah, I can't imagine 16-year-old me in prison. Oh, my God. I would have been just a target. I would have had like a big target painted on my forehead.
Yeah, and you wouldn't be mature enough to figure out how to handle life.
No.
In the prison, right?
No.
How to protect yourself, how to, avoid problems, as he said.
I mean, I had my troubles when I was a teenager, but I was not savvy when it came to anything. I mean, sure, David had his little struggles as well, but this is grown-up jail. This isn't reform school.
Yeah.
Through furthering his education, David realized that he enjoyed writing. David later told CochraneNow.com, quote, I was just a young man inside a penitentiary, and the first thing I wanted to do was tell the whole world my story. I ended up getting a typewriter, and I was typing inside the prison where everybody was in open front cells, cages, and people could hear me. And everybody was upset at this young guy trying to type all night, and I'm lucky I'm still alive here to talk to you today. David kept his head down for the next few years while Joyce continued the fight to get her son out of prison. It was beginning to look like the process had started. In the summer of 1980, David was granted a pass to attend a family event. He'd been in jail for more than 11 years at that point. David, though, took the opportunity to flee custody one more time, and a nationwide warrant was issued for David Milgaard's arrest. Only days later, David sent Joyce a letter with no return address. It read, Dear Mom, where to start and what to say. I am happy, but truly wonder what direction I am to go. Should have a job starting Wednesday. It's part-time, 4 hours, 6 days a week, but a start. I have met a few people and somehow realize I must practice a better regimen of self-discipline in the sense that so far I've been doing or living in a very hedonistic sort of fashion. Freedom is beautiful, and Toronto a place that has a strong pulse, if you like, compared to Winnipeg's nightlife. I keep asking myself, what is my direction? What do I want from life now? And I only come up with to enjoy it. Maybe that will refine itself somehow. I hope so. Tell Father for me that I hope he understands my leaving and that I care for him and hope he knows that. I wish I could come home. 11 years wanting only that and then putting myself in the position where I can't have what I want most. I love everyone and miss you all. If I could understand why life has been as it has for me, where am I to go in it? Where have I come from? I would be content, but it all makes no sense. I shall continue to seek good in others and do good as I see it. I love you, David." End quote. Joyce later admitted to having visited David in Toronto during his 2 months of freedom, led there by a series of coded phone calls and messages from her brother who knew where David was. David Milgaard's escape was huge news. One person at least saw it as an opportunity to tell the truth. 6 days after David's escape, on August 28, 1980, Linda Fisher walked into the Saskatoon Police Department. She told him that she believed her ex-husband, Larry Earl Fisher, was in fact responsible for Gail Miller's murder, and that from that morning, she was missing a paring knife that resembled the one used in the crime. The report was received, filed, referred, and possibly evaluated on a cursory basis by the Saskatoon police, but it went no further at the time.
Yet another opportunity to make this right.
Right? But at the same time, they think they already have it right. Maybe this is a woman they looked at her as maybe she's this vindictive person.
Yeah, but they didn't have it right.
No, but what is also interesting is they didn't look at, well, hey, wait a minute. Didn't this guy live in the basement?
There's a lot of, hey, wait a minute moments in here.
There are so many.
Right?
Yeah.
David Milgaard was taken into custody once again on November 8, 1980, having enjoyed 77 days on the run. A man he'd taken in became wise to the fact that David was hiding something and reported him to police, who quickly figured out who he was. A meeting was set by the man, and police were there too. When someone walking past him called out his name, David ran. He was shot in the back as he fled by a plainclothes policeman's shotgun. Injured with shotgun pellets dangerously close to his spine, David was taken into custody, hospitalized, and then sent back to prison when he was well enough.
Holy crap.
Yep.
So he was shot in the back by the police.
Right.
Literally.
Yeah.
After being stabbed in the back figuratively by the system.
Yes. Yep. It's bizarre.
Hold on, just let me collect myself.
Yeah.
This just keeps getting worse and worse. And you know what? I can't blame him for trying to get out of jail. If I was innocent and all of my appeals were lost, I'd probably try to break out as well, because I wasn't in there for the right reason, and I didn't do anything wrong.
But then there's also this culture that says only the guilty run.
Well, we now know that the innocent run as well.
Yeah, right?
Mm-hmm.
Joyce redoubled her efforts, offering a $10,000 reward for any information leading to Gail Miller's real killer and subsequently her son's exoneration. There were all kinds of crazies who came out of the woodwork trying to claim the $10,000 with elaborate but false stories. Joyce went over and over the court transcripts of David's trial looking for something solid to free David. According to author Helena Katz in her book Justice Miscarried, quote, in 1986, Joyce Milgaard gave well-known criminal lawyer Hirsch Wolch her last $2,000 to review the court transcripts to look for grounds to apply to the federal justice minister for the, quote, mercy of the crown under what was then Section 617, now Section 696.1 of the Criminal Code. This provision gave the minister the sole discretion to order a new trial or give Milgaard another chance to appeal his conviction to the Saskatchewan Court of Appeal. Finding enough compelling evidence to prove Milgaard's innocence and persuade the minister to overturn Milgaard's conviction proved to be an overwhelming task. No organization or agency existed to help the Milgaards gather the information they needed, and legal aid in Manitoba and Saskatchewan refused to fund lawyers and investigators. End quote. Around the same time, Joyce and crew found Deborah Hall, who'd been in the motel room during David Milgaard's supposed confession that had been recounted at his trial by Craig Melnick and George Lapchuk. Hall, who claimed she remembered the night clearly, said David never confessed and the recounting by Melnick and Lapchuk was false. She'd never been questioned by police. Forensic DNA analysis was also fast becoming more accepted in courts, and samples taken from the crime scene were given to Vancouver pathologist Dr. James Ferris for testing. Although Ferris was concerned about the chain of evidence, the samples had been collected 4 days after the murder, he determined that they had not been placed there by David Milgaard. In December of 1988, with the new evidence, David's lawyers applied to have David's case reopened. A year and a half later, armed with Ferris's report, Joyce, frustrated with the government's inaction, approached and was very publicly snubbed by Kim Campbell, who was then the federal justice minister and later very briefly Prime Minister of Canada. In February of 1991, Kim Campbell refused the request to reopen David's case.
I rather embarrassingly, Mike, did some work on Kim Campbell's election campaign back then.
Oh, no.
I was a very young man.
Mm-hmm.
Election that she lost, and in fact, the Conservative Party was pretty much wiped out for a while at that point.
Yeah. Kim Campbell, I watched the video of the interaction between her and Joyce Milgaard, and I understand why Kim Campbell did not want to engage with Joyce Milgaard in front of the media, because it wouldn't have been the proper process.
And she's a politician.
But also, that aside, that it was probably against the process, but the way Kim Campbell dismissed Joyce Milgaard is so hard to watch. You can find it in the documentary that the Fifth Estate did on this. It's on YouTube. But essentially, Kim Campbell just swats Joyce Milgaard aside like she's an irritating fly. Not like she didn't hit her or anything, but just like
the demeanor of it all.
The demeanor was, she just was like, this is a fly. And as Kim Campbell is muttering as she walks away, saying, if you want this dealt with, we have to do it the proper way. Instead of stopping and having a conversation with a mother.
Yeah. And
saying, but, this guy's in jail. He's a murderer. He's a convicted murderer. How's this going to look in the media when I'm up for re-election?
Yeah.
If this guy is actually a murderer.
Joyce Milgaard refused to give up. From Helena Katz in her book Justice Miscarried, quote, Milgaard's supporters used a media campaign to gain public support for a review of his case. Since authorities didn't seem to be listening, they hoped that public support for his pleas of innocence would get attention for his case and influence the justice minister. On September 7, 1991, they held a candlelight vigil outside a Winnipeg hotel where Prime Minister Brian Mulroney was expected. The group lit one candle for each of the 22 years that Milgaard had spent behind bars. When Mulroney stepped out of his car, he greeted Joyce Milgaard and spoke with her briefly. She told him that her son's emotional state was deteriorating and asked if the Prime Minister might help get him transferred from Stony Mountain. She also asked if a speedy review of his case was possible. Mulroney told her that she was courageous. A month later, David Milgaard was transferred to Rockwood Institution, a minimum security prison beside Stony Mountain. End quote. New hearings were finally granted. The case would be reopened in November of 1991. At the hearings, Ron Wilson recanted his testimony about seeing blood on David Milgaard's clothing and his supposed behavior after returning to the car that morning all those years ago. Milgaard testified too, again professing his innocence. The eerily similar sexual assaults committed by Larry Earl Fisher around the time of Gail Miller's murder were also a big focus of the proceedings. On April 14, 1992, the Supreme Court of Canada ordered a new trial for David Milgaard. The province of Saskatchewan stayed proceedings, saying they didn't want to try him again. David Milgaard was released on April 16, 1992. He was then 39 years old and had spent 23 of those behind bars for something he had not done. A lawsuit was filed on David's behalf against the Saskatoon police officers and Saskatoon justice officials. The Saskatchewan Deputy Minister of Justice referred allegations of wrongdoing in the handling of David Milgaard's case to the RCMP for investigation. The Deputy Attorney General of Alberta was asked to direct the RCMP investigation and make any charging decisions. Over the next 2 years, a team of 10 RCMP officers conducted an extensive investigation into 68 allegations of wrongdoing against the police and Crown officials. The Saskatchewan Deputy Minister of Justice made public the appeals of the RCMP investigation and the Alberta Justice Report, concluding there was no criminal wrongdoing nor any attempt to obstruct justice in the investigation or prosecution of David Milgaard. The full RCMP report was later released to the public on July 12, 1995.
So if that report can be trusted,
Mm-hmm.
which many can question,
Right.
because I can't, I'm not saying this happened, but I can't stand the closing of ranks BS that happens.
Mm-hmm.
If that was the case here, cops aren't there to protect other cops. They're there to protect us.
Right.
Right. And if there was nothing that was done wrong, in terms of nobody should get charged with anything,
Right.
then it was just complete and total ineptitude on a massive scale. And that doesn't say much easier.
Right.
Much either. Right.
So in defense of the police and
Yeah. And I don't know, right? I don't know all the details. That's why I'm kind of like leaving it open, but we've seen it before. Right?
Mhm.
Yeah.
But this is the thing. In defense of the police, you have witnesses who are saying, Milgaard said this. I saw Milgaard do this, even though I'm not willing to testify about that. It is like, so they're going by what these kids,
Stone teenagers,
who are telling different stories, probably because at different points in the interviews, they're afraid.
Yeah.
They become afraid and think, oh dear, if I don't go along with this, I'm going to be charged myself, or maybe I'm going to be shunned by this community of kids,
Yeah.
Who are saying that this is what happened.
Yeah.
It's like a whole...
I mean, it would have been a tough job. I give them that. It would
Mhm.
have been a really tough job.
Yep.
But when you look back, right, at all these opportunities.
Yeah.
Mm.
On July 18th, 1997, the results of DNA testing conducted by the Forensic Science Service in the United Kingdom indicated that the semen found on Gail Miller's panties and dress could not have originated from David Milgaard, and that it matched Larry Earl Fisher's DNA profile. The same day, the Department of Justice in Canada stated that the results of DNA testing show that a terrible wrong was done to David Milgaard by his wrongful conviction. The Federal Minister of Justice expressed her sympathies and regrets to David Milgaard and his family. As well that day, the Saskatchewan Minister of Justice stated that a wrong of the most serious kind has been done to David Milgaard by the justice system, and he apologized. He also stated that the wrongful conviction would require compensation. A public inquiry was ordered, and, of course, the police investigation into the case had been reopened. Larry Earl Fisher was arrested and charged with the rape and murder of Gail Miller a week later. On May 17, 1999, David Milgaard was awarded $10 million in compensation for his wrongful conviction. From the Vancouver Sun on May 18, 1999, quote, Joyce Milgaard said her son and the family now need space and time to continue healing. We've been living in a fishbowl and we'd kind of like to get out of that fishbowl, his mother said. Under the settlement, Milgaard would receive $9.25 million for pain and suffering, lost income, out-of-pocket expenses, and legal fees. He had already received $500,000 in interim compensation and would receive a lump sum payment of $8.75 million in a few weeks. Milgaard's mother, who worked tirelessly in securing her son's release from prison, received $750,000. Government officials said most, if not all, of payments would be tax-free, end quote. At the end of her book, Joyce Milgaard spoke about feeling uncomfortable being called a hero for doing what she saw was the only thing that could be done. She wrote, quote, It wasn't Canada that hurt our David. It was a few people who held power in the province of Saskatchewan. I remain intensely proud of being Canadian. Canadians from coast to coast join me in praying for David's release, and I still feel that outpouring of love, and it makes me strong. David's future won't be easy, but I'm optimistic. We loved David through all of those years in prison, and we'll love him through the rest of this, and he'll make it." End quote. The same evidence that had exonerated David Milgaard convicted Larry Earl Fisher. On November 22, 1999, after a trial, Fisher was found guilty of the murder of Gail Miller and sentenced to life. Fisher's appeal was denied in September of 2003. In January of 2005, the year-long judicial inquiry into David Milgaard's wrongful conviction began. More than 36 years had passed. It reviewed testimony of 200 witnesses and over 150,000 pages of documentary evidence. From constitutionalstudies.ca, quote, "According to Justice Edward McCallum, who headed the Royal Commission of Inquiry into the wrongful conviction of David Milgaard, the criminal justice system failed David Milgaard. The 815-page report does not explain exactly why Milgaard was wrongfully convicted. Nevertheless, Judge McCallum points to Art Roberts, a polygraph expert brought in from Calgary, as having perhaps pressured Milgaard's friends, Nicole, John, and Ron Wilson, to lie during their examination by police. McCallum did find in his conclusion that the police acted in, quote, good faith, and that there was not malfeasance on their part. The inquiry called for Parliament to create a new independent body with the goal of reviewing allegations of wrongful conviction. With the existence of such an agency, commissions of inquiry such as the $10 million commission led by Justice McCallum could have been avoided. If significant public expenditure can be avoided by the establishment of a truly independent, transparent, and effective investigative agency, then it should be done." End quote. David Milgaard became well known and respected for his post-exoneration activities, helping those wrongfully convicted. In 2020, more than 50 years after Milgaard's wrongful conviction, the University of Manitoba presented him with an honorary Doctor of Law degree. Milgaard told Cochrane Now, quote, "The thing that keeps me busy now is I talk across the country, mostly at universities and also at conferences and stuff. I try to tell young people that are moving toward becoming a service to others inside the justice community in relation to justice issues and perspectives how important it is for them to, first of all, be responsible, not to do anything wrong, and second of all, to keep that passion up they need to have there to help others and make a difference in people's lives." End quote. David spoke about his continued struggles to do just normal things. When asked about what his children know, he said, quote, "They know my story quite well. My son has actually heard me talk to high school students here in Cochrane and made me feel like $1 million. After I talked, he said, 'Dad, I really appreciate your talk today.' I asked, 'Why did you like it?' And he said it was loud and it was important about things that make a difference. And that made me feel really good." End quote. Milgaard did do so much good after he was released, and I have a lot of admiration for him. The case, a serious miscarriage of justice, is without a doubt one of the most egregious examples of police tunnel vision in Canadian history. Milgaard's case was made even more famous with books, films, TV, and news coverage, and even a song. Wheat Kings, by the Tragically Hip on their 1992 album Fully Completely, was the inspiration for the loons at the beginning of every episode of Dark Poutine. The song itself was inspired by the case of David Milgaard and Gail Miller. In the tune, the late great Gord Downey can be heard singing 20 years for nothing. Well, that's nothing new. Besides, there's no one interested in something you didn't do. And further on, late-breaking story on the CBC, A Nation Whispers, we always knew he'd go free. They add, "You can't be fond of living in the past, because if you are, then there's no way you're going to last." End quote. I've been planning to cover this case for some time, and I was hoping to perhaps interview David Milgaard for the show, but it never happened. Sadly, Mr. Milgaard, an outspoken advocate for the wrongly convicted, passed away in a Calgary hospital on May 15th of this year after a short illness and complications from pneumonia. David Milgaard is survived by his wife, Christina, whom he married after his release, and their 2 teenage children.
I was so sad to see that he had passed. And
Yeah.
my condolences to his family. You know what? In the end, he was a really great guy.
Right.
He did so much good over the years after he got out.
He could have
he
just
could have been a bitter, horrible person.
Mm-hmm.
He got out there and he tried to help. Like, can you imagine? Would you do that? Would you be able to?
I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know. I like to think that I would if I had gone through it, but maybe I would just sit on my $10 million and just
go fishing,
flip everybody the bird.
Yeah.
Why not? I mean, he had every right to do that.
Yeah.
If he wanted to, he could have just...
Nobody would have judged him on that either.
No, everybody would have said, yeah, good for him.
Yeah, but he did a lot of good out there.
Yeah. Hopefully, in these episodes, we've done the memories of both Gail Miller and David Milgaard, for want of a better term, a bit of justice. Larry Earl Fisher, 65, died on June 10th, 2015 at Pacific Institution in Abbotsford, where he was serving his sentence for Gail Miller's murder. A reminder, Fisher served only 16 years for the crime, while David had spent 23 years behind bars for the same thing. And that's it for Dark Poutine episode 225, Tragedy Times 2, Gail Miller and David Milgaard, Part 2.
Wow. That's,
Yeah.
that was a big one, Mike.
Yes.
The Supreme Court had a chance, very early on in this to get David a new trial, but they didn't. I mean, in the end, they made it good.
Mm-hmm.
Quite late, though. And, with all the news about the Supreme Court in the USA right now, I embarrassingly realized during this episode that while I can name a lot of the U.S. Supreme Court judges, I could only name the Chief Justice here in Canada.
Who is?
And his name is Wagner.
Okay.
And Richard Wagner. And I was like, wow, these are the people that sort of set the rules for me. And I don't know who any of them are.
Yeah.
And I bet a lot of our Canadian listeners wouldn't even be able to tell you how many judges we have on the Supreme Court, let alone who they are. There are 9 of them, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
Or realize that there's, and we're going to talk about this in the after show, Mike, there's no governing legislation on how the Supreme Court justices in Canada are selected, except that 3 of them have to be from Quebec.
Of course.
And so we've essentially been doing it ad hoc since 1875, like just muddling along. And, with this growing discussion about Supreme Courts and Roe versus Wade and the gun rules in America, I think it's incredibly interesting. So we're going to talk about it in some more detail, both about the Supreme Court in Canada and what's happening in the United States in the after show. Only Patreons have access to the after show.
$5
But
plus.
if you become a $5 Patreon, you can get the added bonus content.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, so please do that, because
We love you and we want you to.
Mikey needs to eat. Mikey won't eat it. He doesn't eat anything. That is the one thing. There's commercials that people have, and I guess it's called the Mandela effect.
Yeah.
And one Mandela effect thing is about that TV commercial. Mm-hmm. People say, "Oh, Mikey will eat it. He'll eat anything." No, that's not what the commercial said. They gave him this life cereal, and they were saying, "Let's give this to Mikey. He won't eat it. He doesn't eat anything." Mm-hmm. And he eats it, and that's why they say he likes it. He really likes it.
Other cereals available.
Yes, because we're not selling life cereal. But anyway.
Does it still exist?
Yeah, it still exists.
Okay.
Yeah, but the Mandela effect is really interesting. If you're not familiar with the Mandela effect, look it up. Some of the things that you think you know, you really don't know. It's pretty fascinating. Like some people were like, Nelson Mandela died in jail. No, he didn't. No, he did not.
Well, that's... Who thinks Nelson Mandela died in jail?
A lot of people.
Wow. Read people.
Yeah, look at the news that's not in your own province or state. Anyway, on to voicemails. But first, let's hear from our sponsors.
That's right.
It's time for voicemails. You can leave us a message at 1-877-327-5786 or 1-877-DARK-PTN. We'd love to hear from you. Let's see who called us this week.
And here is our first voicemail. So let's take a listen.
Oh, hey there, fellas. It's your old pal Satan. Just calling to wish you a happy belated birthday, Matthew. Well, I guess it'll be belated by the time you get this message. Anywho, also, in a recent show, you talked about the murder of Gail Miller, and you mentioned the origin of the loon call at the beginning of your show. Well, I can tell you exactly what song that comes from. Wheat Kings by the Tragically Hip. In fact, we play that song here in hell all the time. Like, literally, it's on a loop. Anywho, I'm sure your listeners don't know where it's from or don't care, and I guess it just goes to show that no one's interested in something you didn't do. Give my love to Steve, would you? Okay, bye.
Well, thanks for calling, Satan.
Thanks, Satan.
But we scooped your voicemail.
That's so funny.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I have to say to Satan that in my hell, the Tragically Hip would be played all the time.
Well, that's what this guy's saying. So he probably...
Everyone talks about them. I don't even really know what they're saying, but because everyone talks about them all the time, I don't want to know.
I love the Tragically Hip, Matthew. Anyway.
Oh, Mike. You know, even though I played rock versus opera Dolly Deluxe for you while you're in the car with me.
My tastes are eclectic.
They
what
are
can
actually.
I say?
You actually have a very, very eclectic taste, and a lot of it is very good.
Thank you.
Oh, the stuff that I agree with.
Okay.
Anyway, thank you, Satan.
Thank you, Satan. And I guess tell Mussolini and Hitler hello. Boy, oh boy. Let's move on. Here's our second voicemail.
Greetings, Mike and Matthew. My name is Bo, and I'm from Vancouver, but I am calling you from Tuktoyaktuk. I'm actually on a quest to drive every highway in Canada. And this year, I finally made it up to Tuk, which I promised when I did, I would give you guys a call and leave a voicemail. While I explore the country, drive through all these communities, I love listening to you guys, filling me in on some of the dark history or events behind some of these places, especially hearing about some of the cases that have had an impact on my life and my own communities. So yeah, I just wanted to thank you guys for keeping me entertained during my trip. And go poop in your tooth, eh?
Well, wow.
Thank you, Bo.
Driving every highway in Canada. That's really cool.
I wonder if he's doing it with his brother Luke.
Bo and Luke Duke.
Yeah. I'm sorry, Bo. You probably have gotten that. Well, actually, you sound younger. You might not know it, but you've probably gotten that a million times.
Maybe.
That is amazing. I'd love to do that.
Yeah, it would be a really fun thing to do. We've driven some highways together. We just drove the I-5 and the 405 in Washington State.
And a million side roads because...
And a million, because...
Waze took you there?
Waze took us around a really serious accident on the highway.
Other mapping systems available.
Well, I'd love to actually do ads for Waze, to tell you the truth, because
it's actually really good.
Well, it's what I use exclusively.
Yeah.
So,
but thank you, Bo. That's great. I wonder where he's headed next.
I don't know, but Bo should be doing a podcast about his travels.
Yeah, that would be cool.
That would be very cool. And if you do one, Bo, let us know, and we'll play the promo for you for your show on this show.
Can you imagine doing a podcast from the car?
Yes,
that'd be cool.
I've thought about doing stuff like that.
That's awesome.
Yeah. All right. We have one more voicemail to listen to. Let's take a boo.
Hi, this is Dave from Saskatoon. Just listened to your part one of the David Milgaard, Gail Miller. Just wanted to say that I've actually been wanting to recommend that one, so I'm glad that you're doing it. Looking forward to part two. And Matt, you're talking about why do they do Alphabet Land? I can't answer that, but Alphabet Land is also known as the Hood. There's lots of that's where all the drugs and gangs and prostitutes. So it's not that nice of Saskatoon.
Yeah.
So keep up the good work. I look forward to part two, and go shit in your hat.
Well, thank you so much.
Thanks, Dave. I hope you like the part two.
Yeah.
Alphabet Land. I didn't know it was called that. So all the streets that are named
All the streets
lazily,
that have no name. Yeah.
lazily with letters and numbers.
Okay, so I guess I didn't see that part of Saskatoon because when I went a couple times, it was just this beautiful, like maybe I was just in the fun and the nice, but I loved Saskatoon.
Every town has a other side of the
As
tracks.
an Alphabet Land.
Sure.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Like,
There's even an Alphabet Land in my head.
I'm certain there is.
And I don't go into my head very often. It's in a bad neighborhood and I'll get mugged.
Yep. I say that. Say that too. I don't go into my brain alone because I get mugged for my milk money every time I go in there.
Anyway, thanks for the call, Dave.
All righty.
That's it for this week's voicemails. Again, you can leave us one at 1-877-327-5786 or 1-877-DARK-PTN. We'd love to hear from you, even if it is just to say hi and to tell us to go shit in our hats. If you're stumped for what to chat with us about, a quick story is welcome.
All right. It is time for Patreon and Donut Money Donor shoutouts.
Yay.
And first up, we have
Drum roll.
Lucia Borges. So, Lucia, where is Lucia from?
Lucia is from a small town in Surrey, England
Okay.
called Christmas Pie.
Christmas Pie in Surrey, England. I love that. I want to go to Christmas Pie.
I now also want to go to Christmas Pie.
What is Christmas Pie? I know what Christmas cake is, but I don't think I've ever had a Christmas pie. Have you?
It's pie that you have on Christmas Day.
Well, I get that. Is it like little butter tarts or is it a large butter tart?
I've never had it. I haven't had anything specifically called Christmas pie before.
No, me neither.
Oh.
Now we need to discover what Christmas pie is.
I bet it has lots of nice things in it.
So, Lucia,
It's from Christmas Pie.
they're from Christmas Pie. And what does Lucia do in Christmas Pie?
Bakes
Bakes.
the Christmas pies.
Well, there you go.
So maybe Lucia can tell us what is in a Christmas pie.
Well, I'm sure that Lucia might do that for us if they're up to it. So
Yes.
hopefully, Lucia, you tell us what Christmas pie is, because now we're curious and hungry.
Snap to it. Six more months till Christmas.
Exactly, only 6 more months.
Actually, 6 almost to the day.
And speaking of Christmas, I met this person around Christmas time in Nova Scotia, our next patron.
Okay.
She is Rebecca Cowperthwaite.
Rebecca Cowperthwaite.
And she's a good friend of my sister, Rachel Brown.
Hello. Shout out to Rachel and Rebecca.
Yeah. And thank you so much, Rebecca, for becoming a patron of the show. Rebecca also brought really tasty, yummy treats to my sister's place while I was there.
Did she bring a Christmas pie?
She didn't bring a Christmas pie, but maybe Rebecca knows what a Christmas pie is.
If she's a good baker, maybe she does.
Rebecca looks after my sister's dog, Dexter, sometimes.
Oh.
Yeah, Dexter. He's a good old dog.
Did she name him after the show?
I do believe he's named after the serial killer.
Oh, what was the name of the cat that the girls brought to the meet yesterday? He was
Drax.
Drax, he's so sweet.
Yeah, he was a Bengal. He's very, very sweet.
So
They brought him in a backpack.
yeah, with like not just a normal backpack, like air holes and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it was so nice to have somebody from the barnyard as well.
Yeah, right?
Yeah.
So Rebecca lives in Upper LaHave, Nova Scotia, which is beautiful, by the way. I love Upper LaHave.
Is there Lower LaHave?
There is.
Okay.
There's all kinds of
I
LaHaves.
bet you're from Lower LaHave.
No, I'm from Bridgewater, which is
Oh.
it's on the LaHave.
Okay.
But anyway, I know what Rebecca does for a living, but Matthew, I think she does something on the side. So what is it that Rebecca does on the side?
She is an arms dealer.
An arms dealer.
Yes.
So does she sell guns or does she sell...
No, the big shit.
Oh, so she sells like mannequin arms.
Like air to surface to air missiles.
Oh, like weaponry.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, I thought you were going to say mannequin arms for crafting.
No, she's an arms dealer.
So she sells nukes.
Well, no, she doesn't. She doesn't delve in nukes.
Oh, okay, good for her.
She draws the line.
Draws the line at nuclear weapons.
Yeah. So
missile systems.
Yeah. So she votes against who she actually wants to be in power because she needs to drum up business.
You're terrible.
No, she is for selling arms.
There you go.
Just kidding, Rebecca. We know you don't sell arms.
Fair enough. Next, from Winnipeg, Manitoba.
The Peg.
We have Guinevere Vanderveen.
Hi, Guinevere. Thank you so much.
Guinevere is a really lovely name.
It's a gorgeous name, actually.
It just obviously reminds me of the death of King Arthur.
Okay.
Yeah, La Mort d'Arthur. Because there's a Guinevere in that.
There is, indeed.
Yes.
Probably one of the early Guineveres.
One of probably the first Guineveres, you would think. But anyway, what does Guinevere do there in the Peg?
She's a professor of history.
Oh, what kind of history? We've had a history professor before.
Have we? Well,
Yes.
I like history professors.
Yes, clearly. But what sort of history does she teach specifically?
History about kings, because her name is Guinevere.
Oh, there you go. It's funny how we do tend to become interested in things that are related to ourselves. And I'm not saying...
I do, because I'm reading a lot of history right now, so I have it on the brain.
So that's why everybody's a history professor.
But there's only been 2 now. Don't get snotty.
Oh, dear. So next up, we have someone who we're unsure of where they are from or who they are really, because all they put their name down as is Tovia.
Tovia.
Tovya.
Thank you, Tovia.
Tovia. And I was just having a conversation with Matthew. I'm a bit dyslexic. Interesting. A person would choose writing and reading as a career is a little dyslexic. So I misread Tovia as Tanya, which is interesting. But
hello, Tovia.
So Tovia, what? Well, where is Tovia from first?
She's from
It's not she. Let's just say they.
Okay. Tovia is from Hungry Horse, Montana.
Hungry Horse, Montana?
Yes, that's in the USA.
Well, yes, I know that Montana is in the United States of America.
Yeah, so Tovia comes from Hungry Horse.
Hungry Horse?
Yes.
Wow. And what does Tovia do in Hungry Horse besides feed horses?
You always do that to me.
I do, because I know that you're going to take the easy way.
Is there oil in Montana?
I don't know, probably. There's oil pretty much everywhere. I mean, there's vegetable oil in the store.
Tovia is an oil magnate.
Tovia is an oil magnate.
Getting richer by the day these days.
There you go.
Yes.
Well, thank you so much, Tovia.
Thanks, Tovia. Thank you so much for becoming a Patreon.
Much appreciated.
It really is. But we know you're an oil magnate, so keep it coming.
Yeah, exactly. Next, we have Demetria Milton, and Demetria is from Rowlett, Texas.
Demetria is from Rowlett, Texas.
Demetria is from Rowlett, Texas.
Demetria.
Yeah, I just think of Peter Demeter.
I wonder if Demetria has Greek heritage.
Could be.
So Demetria runs a Greek restaurant.
Okay. There you go. I love Greek restaurants. What's your favorite thing at a Greek restaurant?
Baklava.
Baklava is really good. What I like to say from a Greek restaurant is spanakopita.
Do you know what I call it?
What?
Spanky pitas.
Spanky penis?
No, spanky pita. Spanky pitas.
Oh, okay.
Whenever I'm in a Greek restaurant.
Oh, I thought you said spanky penis.
You're just disgusting.
Well, I was thinking of Dungeons and Dragons.
Okay.
Yeah. No, not really. I was just thinking of Dungeons.
Spanky pitas and baklava.
Yeah.
The 2 best things.
So, Demetria Milton, thank you. And I hope your Greek restaurant is recovering from the pandemic quite handily, but I'm sure you'll be fine.
If we lived nearby, it would be doing great.
I went to a Greek restaurant one time where on Fridays they actually smash plates into the
fireplace.
And yell, "Opa!"
Yeah, exactly.
I
It
love
was
that.
really, really cool.
I worked for a Greek family in a restaurant. It wasn't a Greek restaurant, but after we closed at night, the family would make some like a Greek meal.
Oh,
And we'd all the workers would gather around the table and eat together when we were done. It was fantastic.
that's really cool.
Yeah.
So I guess it's time to move on to Donut Money donors. And there's some interesting donors this week. One sounds like, okay, this is great because it's Carla Harvey.
Hello, Carla Harvey.
She's from Halifax, Nova Scotia. And Carla says, "Hi, Mike and Matthew. Just wanted to say thank you for creating this podcast and delivering such interesting content to us listeners on the regular. It's so nice to have a podcast dedicated to more local true crime where a lot of podcasts focus on American true crime." Well, there you go. And that's why I made the show. As a Nova Scotian, I also appreciate the cases that are specifically from our province. Continue being awesome. Have some donuts on me. Smiley face, Carla Harvey. And thank you, Carla. We did have some donuts on you yesterday.
We did.
At the meetup. We had mochi nut donuts, which were amazing.
Other donuts available.
I had mochi nut donuts this morning for my breakfast.
Did you eat all of them?
No, just one.
Okay. I saw the box in the garbage. And I was like, Mike ate all of them.
No, the box isn't in the garbage. It's in the fridge.
Oh, something else was then.
It's a big thing. And next up, we had some donut money from a fetish website.
That's fantastic.
It's really weird.
Yeah, it's kind of cool. Why not?
And I think maybe, I don't know. It's interesting.
We're not going to say the name of it because thank you so much for the money.
Mm-hmm.
You'll have to pay us a lot more to promote the website.
Right. If you want, yeah.
Can you write it down for me, please, so I can look it up later?
Yes, I definitely will.
Thank you.
But they're from apparently Duncan, British Columbia.
Excellent.
Yeah.
So I'll be logging on and taking a look.
They sell dirty underwear.
Okay.
and by dirty, I mean all kinds of different kinds of dirty.
Wow. Interesting.
Yeah. Oh, boy.
Well, everyone has a fetish.
Yep.
I don't judge.
Yeah. But yeah, for us to say the name of your fetishy site is going to cost you
$1 million.
a lot more money.
But thank you so much.
But nice try. Nice.
Yeah, you had us having a fun time here.
Yeah.
Talking about this. Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm. And I don't think it's something that I would necessarily buy, but anyway, to each their own.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Love is love, right, Matthew? Even if it's dirty
And
underwear.
fetish is fetish. Yeah. I have weird fetishes.
Maybe that's what we should talk about in the after show.
I like big noses.
What?
You've met Justin.
Justin has a good nose, a strong nose.
Maybe it's not fetish. I'm attracted to men with big noses.
Well, you would have liked my cousin Rob,
Really?
the figure skater.
Okay.
Yeah, because I told you we called him the schnoz.
Oh yeah, the schnoz. Yeah. No, not because it like relates to anything else. I just like a proper nose on a man's face.
Oh well, there you go.
Are you having a okay time over there?
I'm just dropping.
Your drink is dropping. Okay.
But that's it for Patreon and Donut Money Donut.
Thank you, guys. We really appreciate it.
We do. Thanks to all our patrons and Donut Money donors, past and present, for your generosity. It helps to keep the show going. You can become a patron of Dark Poutine at patreon.com/darkpoutine. For a one-time donation, you can send us donut money via PayPal using our email address, darkpoutinepodcast@gmail.com. If you don't already subscribe to the show, it would mean a lot if you did. You can easily find Dark Poutine on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your favorite shows. If you haven't gotten yours yet, my book, Murder, Madness, and Mayhem, is available to order via a link on the Dark Poutine website. And speaking of darkpoutine.com, please check it out for show notes and other cool stuff. We'd appreciate it if you took the time to give Dark Poutine a like or a follow on Facebook and Instagram. Most importantly, thank you for listening, and tell your friends about us. Word of mouth is a powerful thing. Well, that is it for this episode. We really appreciate that you folks gave us a listen. And David Milgaard, as I've mentioned before, I was planning this episode pretty much from the inception of Dark Poutine, and I'm really glad we got to do it in this way as a two-parter.
Yeah.
Yeah. So until next week,
Don't forget to be a good egg and not a bad apple.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.